So welcome to this morning's session, 10 reasons change strategies fail. It's something that I've been working on probably for about 20 plus years now. And this all started when I was working for a training organization that was providing training opportunities, particularly for young men, the sort of 16 to 19 age group, young men who'd left school with no formal qualifications, had no work experience, and so it was very difficult for them to be hired, even in an entry level position. So through various government agencies, funding was made available to set up and run a couple of workshops in the South Wales valleys where I was living and working. And the workshops, I think it was something like a 12 or 14-week program. And at the end of that time, the people that went through that program would graduate with a level 1 national vocational qualification, which basically said that they were able to turn up, follow instructions, and complete some basic tasks to a certain standard. And that was usually using a variety of different hand tools, some machine tools, and measuring equipment. So the kind of basic knowledge and skills to be able to get a job in a factory, basically. So what we noticed was that of all the participants that came into the program, within the first 2 weeks, like 25–30% would quit. And the number of people sticking through to the end of the program and getting the qualification was probably around about 20%. So after a year or so of this happening, you know, the funding bodies were looking at the cost of running the workshops and looking at the outcomes from the workshop programs, and they just said, no, this isn't cost effective at all. So it's a waste of time, effort, and money, and so they pulled the funding. What I started to notice at that time, there was a number of things that were happening with these young people. Hello, welcome. We're on record. So yeah, a number of things that were happening with these young people. At the same time, I was doing some academic studies, and I was also working as a leader in the non-profit organization. And what I noticed was that there were similar kind of things happening in the non-profit organization with the volunteers who were excited about the work that they were doing initially, but that enthusiasm and that commitment and drive sort of tailed off after a period of time, because the volunteers weren't experiencing the success that they expected to achieve working in the community locally. So what happened then is I started to put together some observations and look at what was potentially going on, and I came up with 10 reasons change strategies fail, or the 10 forces that hold people back from being successful in what they want to achieve. So this diagram here gives us an idea of what I'm thinking here. So what we believe translates into our values, which a core value is a belief in action. So that affects then how we work together, our relationships, then our behaviors and results, and then habits and attitudes, which are habits of thought. So it's very important what we believe. So what I've noticed is when people are not able to accomplish the change that they want, or the desired change, or the required change, the first problem is unbelief. So a typical example of unbelief is where the CEO makes a big announcement on a major change initiative, a transformation, if you like, And then the top team spend the next 2 or 3 hours detailing the strategy and what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, what impact it's going to make, how everything's going to be so wonderful in the future. And then people go for break, and in the lunchroom 10 minutes later somebody sits down at the table and says, well, that'll never work. So that's a classic example of unbelief in action. And so what we often see in organizations when there's an organization-wide change is that there are two main groups of people. People who don't believe that they need to change, everyone else needs to. And then the people who believe that change is necessary, but they don't believe that change can happen for them. So that's people who don't believe they need to change, people who don't believe change can happen. So once a change initiative is happening, or some kind of learning and development program where a change of behavior is required, then unbelief will basically just kill everything right from the get-go. So then the next thing I noticed was inaccurate perceptions. This could be also termed learned helplessness. So for argument's sake, third generation unemployed, it's very difficult for people to, for people who've grown up in that environment of unemployment. By the time it gets to the third generation, that there's no point in trying because it's never going to work kind of thinking has really become entrenched in the family unit. And that's been recognized. There's different initiatives. Now, one particular one I heard of recently, again, back in South Wales in the UK, a worker is assigned to a family, and that worker spends time with the family to undo the learned behavior so that particularly the next generation are able to do well in the education system and then enter into the workplace. So inaccurate perceptions, that's really to do with having a correct understanding of what's really happening, if you like. Designing a way to be able to understand quickly and easily what is really happening. So there's a couple of basic questions to do with perception, and that's where are we now and how did we get here? And so unless we know where we are and what got us here, then all of our efforts to move on where we want to be in the future and how we're going to get there, we have to understand what brought us to the current point, because if we keep repeating those same things that got us to where we are now, we're not able to move beyond our existing capabilities. And so there's a couple of basic tools I'm just going to outline briefly. It's what's called theoretical frameworks and analytical tools. So theoretical frameworks we get from textbooks and literature, research papers, that kind of thing. So it's established knowledge that is the theoretical framework of what should be happening for us to be successful individually and as teams, as a whole organization. And there's growing bodies of evidence in these areas continuing.